Oh wow. You can tell it's Friday Arvo. Hello! I'm going to try really hard to be mature. Oh, I was going to broadcast this to Instagram too and I forgot. And it's too late. I don't want to do it now. Anyway, it's not nice to start off complaining, is it? Feel free to say hello if you're about. And I hope you're having a wonderful Friday afternoon. 4 o'clock. Not sure if I normally jump on at this time, but I will wait a little while and see who's around. I know we normally have a bit of lag too. So, I'm going to try really hard to be mature and regular. Sounds a bit boring, but hey, whatever. It's Friday afternoon, I get a little bit grossly immature. Say hello if you're around. Martha, hi. I get to see you again today. I feel so spoilt. I hope you've had a great day since this morning. Hi, Katerina. Always nice to see you. Let's talk about role play and PDA. Now, normally, please do not be mature. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Phoebe. Hi, Steph. I don't think I've ever heard anyone in my life say, please do not be mature. Hi, Lucy and Brianne. It's not hard for me to not be mature. Let's start with a little song. So, PDA, I am committed to continuing to call it Persistent Drive for Autonomy. Thank you, Dr. Wen Lawson, for that. And you know what? It actually says on my diagnostic report, Persistent Drive for Autonomy, instead of Pathological Demand Avoidance. How fortunate am I? How lucky am I that I get to look at a report about myself that says I have a persistent drive for autonomy. Very positive. So my little song goes like this. Persistent drive for autonomy. Persistent drive for autonomy. Persistent drive for autonomy. Persistent drive for autonomy. Woo! And you've got to make sure you get the get your teeth over your bottom lip. It's a good way to remember it anyway. Instead of saying pathological demand avoidance. Oh. So, let's talk about role play. I guess why I thought it might be a nice idea to have a chat about this is because I get a lot of questions about not so much role play itself, but our children who are PDAs taking on villains, always needing to be the villain, the bad guy, the anti-hero. And I think this is really important to talk about because a large amount of the emails that I get are parents wanting to know, is there any chance that my child may have an antisocial personality difference? And there's always the chance that that might be a thing. Always. That's neurodiversity, isn't it? But let's talk about PDA first. With PDA, one of the most difficult things about this particular profile is that we don't give away too much about our true feelings and our inner world because it puts us in a position of being vulnerable, and that does not feel safe. So we often will end up with other diagnoses or misdiagnoses instead of PDA. And as we know, PDA is a very new... Hey Nellie, how you feeling, buddy? Should I tell everyone why I'm asking? No, I won't do that to you. PDA is relatively new in its research. So, a lot of our children will be interested in gore and dark themes. Kia ora! And they may be interested in fighting and action and standover characters, and so as parents we might come away feeling a little bit concerned about that. And that might be because of what we've seen in the movies or what we've read in books. There are lots of, myths perpetuated in media. Summer, hello! I can't wait for you guys to find a house. Really excited for you to find somewhere. Now, we know that role play is often a form of demand avoidance for PDAs, so we will take on characters, we'll take on, we might pretend we're a giraffe if we're asked to brush our teeth. And our response might be, well, I can't brush my teeth because I'm a giraffe, and giraffes don't brush their teeth. Or giraffes' legs are too long and they can't bend their knee enough to get the toothbrush up to their mouth. We get very creative with our demand avoidance. So that's one reason why we often engage in role play. The safety aspect of role play is really important too. It means that we can almost hide behind characters and become someone in a particular role so that we can take action and be brave and say things we wouldn't normally say because we're not really being ourselves. So there's no real sense of vulnerability there. I'm just reading Sarah's comment. He's locked in it right now. I'm hiding from the assassin in Ghosts of Tsushima. Yes, sounds very familiar. I remember being in an OT session with one of my children once, and any time we went to engage in any kind of play, my child would take whatever was in their hand, whether it would be a little Lego man or a car or a Barbie doll or whatever it was, and turn it into a villain and be crashing into everyone and rah. And our OT at the time, who is no longer our OT, was very, very quick to jump on that and say, when we treat our friends like that, they may not want to be our friends. Those aren't good ways of making friends with people. And I think, with all due respect, I think that's a very superficial and very shallow way to come at a situation like that with a child. It's really, really important to figure out what's behind the behaviour. What's behind taking on roles? What's behind always needing to be in a villain role? And it's very easy for us as adults to very quickly decide that there must be something sinister going on at home, or they must be feeling really angry inside and that's why they're being a bad guy. It's not always that black and white. Now, if we think about this from the position of a child with a PDA profile, and we think about their lives and their histories, I'll talk about mine. I had a lot of friends as a young person, but none of them mirrored back to me my internal world. And it wasn't about just being autistic or ADHD, it was about being a PDA. There were additional elements within that I could not see in any of my peers. I also couldn't see those elements reflected in adults around me. They weren't reflected in storybooks. And so, whilst other children might have books written that they can relate to, they might have things on TV that they can see that they can relate to, friends that they relate to. As much as I was very social, and PDAs generally are quite socially motivated, I just didn't see what I knew was inside me in my friends. I hope this is making sense. I usually stop and ask, is this making sense? Now, if you think about that for our children who are doing their very best, who have a neurobiological response to their environment, people, places and things, who are often misunderstood, reprimanded, corrected, told off, punished, have imposed consequences, and are still doing their very best. No matter how they behave, they are doing the best they can at the time. Now, if they don't have any models of that in anyone else in the world, and then they see a villain on TV or a character that everybody fears or everybody is frowning at or everybody is reprimanding or telling off or making plans to change, bam. That is the first time in our lives that we identify with somebody else in the world. And even though there are differences there, even though there are clear differences, we are not trying to take over the world. We're not trying to be evil or, we're not corrupt. The behaviour often looks the same as an outcome. And the way that people respond to villains and anti-heroes and bad guys is the same. So sometimes when we watch a children's movie, as PDAs, we will relate more. Nicole, thank you so much. We will relate more to villains and characters who are disapproved of because that's our story. That's our experience. The other thing about taking on characters, and I can't even remember what I was going to say then. Don't you love ADHD? So I was talking about role play being a form of demand avoidance, role play and becoming the villain, giving us a model of someone that's the first person that's like us. I have no idea where I was going. Yes, I do. I remember now. Something I talk about often. Thanks for being so patient with me, everyone. Something I talk about often in regard to PDA is the exchange of control or compensation. And what this means is that there are going to be situations in our lives, in our daily routines, where we are going to be forced to do things, or we are going to have no ability to avoid particular things that show up as demands. And what happens then is that there has to be a compensation level. So what this looks like is, and I always use this example, so I'm going to use it again, being a child in a classroom, a PDA, needing help to move forward with work, not wanting to ask for help because it makes us feel vulnerable and unsafe, but knowing we can't move forward unless we get the help. Putting our hand up to ask for help, getting the help from the teacher, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden we might pick something up and turf it across the room, hi Cynthia, at little Emma sitting up the front, and it hits little Emma in the head. And we're just as shocked by our behaviour as everyone else. But what's happening there is this. PDAs need this. We need balance all the time. Other people call it control. We call it balance. I call it balance. And what happens is, if I have to ask for help, then I quickly create a power imbalance where I'm down here and the person I'm asking for help is up here. And that is grossly uncomfortable for a PDA. Grossly uncomfortable. And it's not a conscious will or choice. It is a neurobiological response. It's just how we're wired. And it's very, very difficult. So, when we create that power imbalance by asking for help and we're down here, our very clever neurobiology knows that we have to act fast because this is a primal brain. We have to act fast to get that balance back. So what can we do? What does our brain force us to do? Engage in behaviors that might shock people, because the response that we get from that behavior elevates us back up here, sometimes up here, to overcompensate. So when we are, I keep losing my train of thought, and I know why. I'm going to tell you why. Because I never announce that I'm doing a live, and because I announced I'm doing a live at 4, PDA is like, no, I'm going to scatter your brain so you can't do this. And it won't even let me get back on track now, and it's so frustrating. This is just an example of what to be aware of with your children, especially if they're in a classroom. What on earth was I talking about? Compensation. Yes, being a villain. So, when we're being a villain or a bad guy, we are in control all of the time, which means we are preventing ourselves from being vulnerable, which means that we are safe. So, when we are in control, we are not experiencing that power imbalance. We are not down here, we're here. When we're a villain, when we're aggressive, we're here. I'm 42 in a couple of weeks, and I'm still that way with my husband, with my friends who are also PDAs, but not in a nasty or mean way. Just sometimes our joking will get really heavy, will get really personal and throw insults at each other. But these are friends I've had all my life, and we understand each other. And these are all forms of compensation as well. So the behaviour changes as we get older, but it doesn't go away. The PDA brain is forever, and it will seek compensation forever, because there are going to be certain things I have to do in a day that I can't just say, nah, not doing it. I'd love to, I try to. Danny, hi. I'm so happy to see you. I know I say that every time, but I really mean it. So yeah, that's another reason we get into role play. Sometimes we use accents. Sometimes I've just got my children in my head right now. You know, last night, one of my children, my youngest child has had a 39-degree fever for about 3 days, and it's finally broken today. And when I asked, how do we feel about taking some Nurofen to get that temperature in check? Because there was a lot of pain and discomfort with the fever. And my child turned around like this. This is how they responded. Huh? And that's a form of compensation. And all we see as adults is a child who's hilarious and being funny. That's an acceptable form of compensation. So my child didn't want to take the medication, but knew that they needed to feel better. Now I'm just going back up here because Smelly Nelly asked me a question. Can you explain more about the difference between balance and control? Sure. It's just a matter of people choosing their language, really. it looks like we are grasping for control all the time, but we are desperate to come back into balance. The whole point of PDA is that anything that compromises our autonomy or freedom escalates our anxiety. So I guess anything that gets in the way of my freedom, and that could be somebody saying, basic things that set off my threat response. So then I might say, no, I'm not doing that, I have to do it my way. Or doing something in a varied way so that I can have some control. And what that control is me bringing it back in. Example might be, I might say to my 10-year-old, would you like... No, I wouldn't say would you like cornflakes for brekkie today? And they might say, okay. But I know that if they say yes to what I've offered for breakfast, there's going to be a variation on it so that they're able to do it because of their PDA brain. So I might put the cornflakes in front of them, and instead of putting milk on it, they might put juice on it. Even though it's disgusting, they have to put their own spin or variation on that thing. It's like children in a classroom who are asked to write their name. They might write their letters back to front or spell it incorrectly on purpose. And it's not because we're being smart Alex. It's not because we're being insubordinate. It's because our brain signals us to do these things to bring us back into balance. Being asked to do work in a classroom, power imbalance. Putting a spelling mistake on a page, getting our balance back. It's really sometimes difficult for others to understand when they don't have a PDA brain, but yeah, that's just how it works. It's a form of compensation. This isn't about role-playing, but medication. I never considered that it feels like a demand to my kiddo who won't take it at all. Is medication really challenging for PDAs? It can be. I mean, it depends. I can only speak for myself. Medication is something that's generally enforced because our body is unwell or we're unwell, and so it's not a choice that we've made. We don't choose to get sick, so then we don't choose the medication. Some of us might be okay with taking it because there's something in it for us, we'll feel better. But also because it's something that's completely foreign. This isn't just for PDA kids, this is for anxious children as well. Jody, thank you so much, that's really kind. When anxiety's escalated, when threat response is escalated, primal mode. Brain is in primal mode. It doesn't care for details. The brain only thinks that its one job, that amygdala's one job, is to keep us safe and alive. So if we're trying to give a PDA medication and their anxiety's escalated, it's going to be tricky, very tricky, and we become quite hypervigilant, so our sensory sensitivity is heightened. We're like this big hypervigilant raw wound. We are scanning always. Victoria says medication can feel like it takes away control of your body. You don't know what's going to happen. Exactly, yeah. One of my children just would not do medication at all. Would never, ever, ever, ever do it. And I just had to sit with the reality as a parent that they were not going to take meds, that I could not break their trust by doing what I had done and trying to sneak it into things. They know. When the brain feels triggered and threatened, it knows it needs to keep us alive, so it is switched on. Anything that tastes a tiny bit different, smells a tiny bit different, looks a tiny bit different. If you have a PDA and you go and get your hair cut, they're going to be highly anxious that you got your hair cut. If you lose weight, they'll be anxious about the change to your appearance. It's extreme anxiety, but it may not present in the same way that we expect it to, but it is extreme anxiety. Eldest wants a VR headset. Me too. As not coping with reality, he wants to live in his fantasy world and play with his game characters. Sarah, sometimes fantasy is really important. I'd say at all times for autistic people, for us autistic folk, fantasy is really important. It's grounding, it's centering, it's soothing. And I know as parents we get a little bit worried about losing our children forever in their fantasy worlds, but sometimes withholding or projecting our fears onto our children mean that they will spend more time in there. It can actually be counterproductive. Thank you, Joanne. Do you think there's another version of this where we might be role-playing, trying to be the smallest, most inconspicuous, the most good? I remember identifying with the good, but most misunderstood person in a story. Perhaps a person who was thought of as a villain, but who was actually secretly doing the right thing. Sounds like an anti-hero, Martha. But the first part of your question is absolutely, yeah. I think what I failed to mention is that we get really caught up around what PDA looks like, and it's not always an unapologetic no in a child. It's not always aggression. It's not always hyperactivity. And I've had conversations with Sally Catt about this, about a more introverted expression of PDA, where the person is choosing to mask and choosing to be quiet and small and to adapt and to get on in life. That's a very real expression of PDA as well. It doesn't mean that they're not triggered or demand avoidant. It can just be more subtle and less obvious. So yes, absolutely. Not all children in role play who are PDAs will identify with the villain or be aggressive in their role play. There's all different kinds of variations. I struggle with how to balance the need for my PDA's need for control. Balance with the feelings of her sister. She feels controlled by the PDA. That happens, most definitely. So we have an ongoing conversation in our home about disability in all of its varying forms and presentations, in its beauty and in its challenges, and how it's really important for us to communicate our needs, and it's important for us to not expect our children who are PDAs to take on the responsibility of changing their behaviour, because it's an invisible disability, and that's really hard for siblings, really hard. So what we do at home is we have an ongoing conversation with siblings about removing themselves and how to look after ourselves when our siblings obviously need space and time, because as PDAs we might go for the jugular, we might go for our siblings, the most vulnerable person, in order to compensate and get our control or balance back. A lot of families will say, well, my other child refuses to move, and then they get into a bit of a squabble. Sometimes it's important to consider that we might have more than one PDA in the family. They might just be different expressions of PDA. Brooke, that is a great comment. Brooke says, in regard to medication, They change up the time of day they take it, otherwise it feels too hard. I have to do that with a lot of things in my routine to get around the demand avoidant nature. Danny says, I never take paracetamol when I need it, or the magnesium that helps my body work better. So irritating, but I can't do anything differently. That's been me for years, Danny. Yeah. And in fact, when I started an anti-anxiety medication 2 years ago, if it was up to me, I would not have continued with it because I felt like my head was in a vice. I felt really awful. But I had someone to support me through, to let me know what might happen and to give it a couple more weeks and see how I feel then. And so I knew what to expect. That was really important. But Danny, I remember being a teenager and having endometriosis and being on the floor passed out and unable to move and in the worst pain of my life, worse than labour. And I would not take medication. Even though I knew it would make me feel better, I would not take medication for it. I would suffer. And that's PDA, isn't it? Sorry everyone, I'm just catching up on comments. What I want to know is, will fluoxetine help with the anxiety in my PDA, highly anxious 8-year-old who has refused to go to school all of term 2? His father, my ex, doesn't want him taking drugs. Erica, so I'm not a medical professional, so I cannot advise on medications, whether they'd work or not. I can share my own experience. Anti-anxiety helped me with chronic anxiety, but it did not change my PDA. It didn't change my PDA at all. And I'm happy about that. Even though life can be really hard as a PDAer, I am really happy about having that internal protective force. And I think sometimes it's really important to consider if our children are so desperate to not be at school that we might consider trialing medication to get them there. I wonder if we might consider other forms, other alternatives, whether it might be possible to have them at home or to communicate with the school for them to only go a couple of days a week or half days, but perhaps they may not be able to attend at all. And having a really good paediatrician or GP to talk through the medication aspect. Sorry, I can't help more. My little boy pretends to be a baby. What a great way to avoid demands, Angela. Babies don't have to do anything. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you so much. Yeah, Victoria, that's true. Something I'm learning about all the time, and reading journal articles about, and in my own experiences, autistic folk, we can be absolutely hypersensitive to medication, so it's important to be working with a professional there and not just taking anything. How can we help them get that control and balance back? What can we do as a parent to help them not feel like the power balance is uneven, especially when they're already elevated? Is there any language or actions that are helpful in the moment, or is it better to just allow them to cope how they need and understand where it's coming from? So there's 3 things that we can do. And I'm going to make it sound really simple, and it's not. It's not simple at all. It depends on how escalated they are, depends on why they're escalated, because sometimes we may not know. The first thing is, when our children are triggered, it's because there's been a power imbalance. So if we can think about how we can return that balance to them, it might be something like pretending that we don't know something that we know that they do know. So we're offering them a position of leadership. We're offering them the opportunity to take the lead, and that can return balance very quickly. If they are really escalated, sometimes we just have to let that take its course, and it might last for hours. It's different for everybody. It depends on why they're escalated. It really depends. I think collaborative parenting is always best for PDAs rather than traditional conventional parenting roles where we are in an authoritarian approach. Collaborative. And that's really hard for us as parents because we face a lot of judgment, a lot of criticism from people who are uninformed, uneducated about our situation, and that can be really painful. But coming together and making decisions together, and sometimes after the situation where a child's been escalated, we can come back to that later and say, you know, how can we make this better? What can we do for you when you feel like that? And sometimes our children won't know. But if we're going to come in and have conversations with our children about situations where they've been escalated, it's best to avoid this. So not sitting at a table where we're having a family meeting, not sitting face to face like this. Maybe it's when we're driving in the car. Maybe it's when we're going for a walk. And there's a lot of freedom. Sarah says, how can you help them unlock their thoughts as being the villain or monster they feel they are? Sometimes our children will say things like, I'm a bad kid, why did you have me? And they'll actually feel annoyed with us, they'll feel frustrated with us for making the decision to have them because it wasn't their choice. We've compromised their autonomy before they even exist, basically. A PDA in a role play as a villain or an anti-hero or a monster, that's not always reflective of our children thinking that they really are villains or monsters. But if they do, if they have lower self-esteem, and that is a very real thing for our children, especially if they're going through the school system, misunderstood, not having their needs met, their behaviours being misunderstood and judged. Love, so much love. I think nearly every opportunity I get, I say something positive about my children. So, with my 7-year-old, just saying, you look so beautiful today, when they brush their hair. Instead of saying, wow, you brushed your hair, because they'll never brush their hair again. Or, wow, that is an incredible drawing. Do you know how much I love you? Have I told you how much I love you today? But really honing in on what I love about them. You are funny. You're so funny. I can't imagine going a single day without laughing the way you make me laugh. Or, you have the best ideas in the world. Even when my children say things like, can you create us a snack that's going to be a sensory nightmare for me. Inside I'll be cringing. But I'll still say, wow, great choice. Just building our children up all the time and being specific so that they know we really mean it. Just going through the comments. Oh, Angela, that's so lovely. Sounds like you're doing amazing. I love that you are collaborating with your son. You know what? It took me a very long time to do that. I think, you know, many of us start out in a very different space with our children. It takes time to work out what our children need. Okay, I've been talking for 42 minutes. That was easy, talking for that long. I'm hoping I haven't missed any comments or any questions, but I may have because the comments move very quickly. Sarah, if your eldest ends up getting a VR headset, I'd love to hear about it. I can tell you right now, I tried a VR headset about a month ago. Instant serotonin and dopamine. Instant. I felt so good. Felt so good. Joanne, that's a beautiful comment. Thank you. Thank you everybody for sending those stars. That's really lovely. I really appreciate it so much. In our home, we just call out PDA and take... That's what we do. And take a pause and discuss later. But I worry my daughter won't have the skills outside our home to negotiate the way she will need to. Do you know what, Candy? The fact that you're doing that now, the fact that you've made it okay to call out PDA is such a great start, because you've already given your children permission, or your child, I'm not sure what your situation is there, you've given your daughter permission to self-advocate. Even if they're just yelling out PDA, that's self-advocacy. That's putting a hand up and saying, I need a break, or don't come at me, or give me space, or don't get up in my grill, or it's not going to be good for you, or give me a moment. We do the same, except we don't say PDA. We say, nah, not doing it. And I know my children won't go out into the world and shout at random people, nah, not doing it. We figure things out as we go. I think that's a great starting point. Christy, can you talk about what you know about gifted with ADHD and intersection with PDA? Yeah, I don't know a lot, to be honest, Cynthia, because something that I see a lot, and I'm coming at this from an ignorant space, I'm going to forewarn you. In the last 20 years since I've been an educator in early childhood, primary and secondary, working with families, being in this space in advocacy and supporting families and educators and allied health, there seems to be a pattern of when children are gifted and ADHD. Gifted is a really interesting thing to me. I understand that it is an indication of IQ, and there are other challenges, and that's why you know, many people use the terminology twice exceptional or 2E. What I see, and I want to be 100% honest, is a lot of children who have been labelled gifted are autistic and highly intelligent. And I think this is really tricky because PDA, there often seems to be some form of overlap between autism and ADHD. So I can speak to that, and I've had conversations with people that run spaces for 2E children as well, who are neurodivergent. Many of our children are overlooked as autistic for a number of reasons, especially when they're PDA. There are notable differences with PDA. Many children have been diagnosed ODD instead of PDA, ADHD, and gifted, and the reasons are that PDAs are more socially motivated. Our interests tend to revolve around people, characters, and living things. So psychology, philanthropy, rock stars, musicians, characters of TV, animals. Autistic people have these interests as well, but PDAs generally have more person-centered interests. Also, eye contact tends to be extremely consistent, and there's a really good reason for that. It's because we don't want to be vulnerable, we don't want people to take advantage, and we need to be outside of a power imbalance, so we look people in the eye. We make it our mission to be very eye contacty, no matter how uncomfortable. It appears as though we socialise better. This is what's written in the books. I really hate saying this, but it appears as though we socialise better, but we have the same cultural challenges between autistic communication and non-autistic communication as all autistic people. So what happens is, because we make good eye contact, because we're socially motivated, because we really enjoy people, we're missed as being autistic. And so we come away with other neurodivergent identifications such as ADHD and gifted. Now, I am in no way minimising the word gifted. I don't know enough about it. But I think it's important for people to know that your children can be PDA and not recognised as autistic. But they cannot be PDA if they're not autistic. PDA is a profile of autism. A lot of parents come in and say, can your child be PDA but not autistic? No, they can't. But somebody may have told you your child's not autistic because they don't meet the criteria based on how they present. And if they're PDA, they probably won't meet the criteria based on how they present. So it's a very real possibility that a child is a PDA that has not been picked up as being autistic. Sorry I couldn't be more helpful with that. Okay, everyone. It's an interesting topic that I'd like to learn more about. I don't know, just going back to the comments, Cynthia, I don't know whether you're from the Bright and Quirky community or you're aware of the Bright and Quirky community. It might be worth Googling that. I know that there are some spaces run for 2E children over there. But yes, I personally and professionally, I try and avoid categorizing people based on their IQ or their intelligence. It's like people that assume that all autistic people are savants, and we're not. But yeah, it's not something that I have a lot of experience with. Sorry, Cynthia. Okay, I'm signing off, and I will see the participants from In Tune with PDA for our last live session in 1 hour and 9 minutes, to be precise. See you all then. Mwah.